You might have seen Vexxsie in previous videos on this channel. I've known her for several years, but I first met her in person less than a year ago. She's given me permission to share the sensitive information discussed in this video, as she strongly believes that openness is the best way to raise awareness and to abolish stigma. Vexxsie suffers from an illness which, pretty much every time I've seen her, has gotten worse and worse. It's known as OCD, and yes, I know that most of us think this means she cleans her hands multiple times or needs her DVDs in alphabetical order, and I suspect this is partly why she isn't getting the help she desperately needs. To try and sum it up, Vexxie's OCD makes her believe that things are contaminated, not by dirt or germs, but by something more morbid. Imagine a horrible dark slime that spreads and infects things. The contamination originated from her hometown as a result of a traumatic childhood. Obviously she can't go there anymore, but also anything that might have passed through there or have any sort of link to her past is a potential source of contamination. This even includes post and other people, which can then infect places closer to her to the point where she's trapped in her own home. It's a bit like a zombie outbreak. The problem with this illness is how stupid it looks. I'm one of those cold, cynical people in life who saw this illness as one that's potentially easy to fake. If you can get money and accommodation for free by faking something like this, which has no physical symptoms, you've hit the jackpot. Indeed, it took me a while to accept it as a legitimate thing myself, since I'm sure we've all had OCD-like tendencies, either as children whose game of tag went out of control, or simply as one of those strange habits you get into. I remember going through a phase of imagining there was an invisible string between me and something else, and that it would become increasingly tangled as things passed between us. The human mind's a strange thing, but most of us are able to curb these thoughts or replace them with different ones over time. Like most physical illnesses though, left untreated or given bad circumstances, mental illness can develop serious complications. When I first met her, Vexxsie was having a rare few months where she was managing okay. The only sign of something being wrong was when she'd throw away items she'd bought, seemingly without reason. If you're anything like me, then you hate waste. You see it as pointless, needless, and an issue with the person throwing the item away rather than the item itself. At one point I recall retrieving an item that she had thrown away, unaware of the severity of the consequences. The problem's in her mind. If she doesn't know, then it's not a problem. Unfortunately, Vexxsie has developed pretty amazing memory and attention to detail. This is because of years of having to memorize pointless information relevant only to contamination she sees. She found out, which resulted in the contamination being spread to yet more items and having to be thrown away. She describes it as being similar to a tree that branches out and spirals out of control if the rules of her OCD are not followed. For those of you who have watched Better Call Saul, you'll know of a strange guy called Chuck who hides away from electromagnetic fields. The result isn't too different to Vexxie's existence. In fact, she sympathizes with the character a lot. The only difference is that Vexxie's situation is even more extreme. If a contaminated phone were to be found in her house, she couldn't just chuck it outside and recover with a space blanket for a couple of hours. She'd likely have to throw away a huge amount of stuff that may or may not have touched it, and carry out countless hours of rituals to rid her home and herself of the contamination. Those who try to help her may end up becoming contaminated in the process, which further complicates matters. So in a nutshell, that's an example of just one form that true OCD can take on. If you have it, then you're likely very lonely because it does scare people away. It goes against every rule in terms of waste, hygiene and social norms that you can imagine. It could also contaminate them and cause you to push them away yourself. Sadly, the pressure of understanding and caring for someone with mental illness is often too much to bear and leaves the sufferer isolated in her home. Recently, things have been especially bad for Vexxsie. About a month ago, she discovered something of mine that I had left up there from my first visit. Since I had unwittingly travelled through her hometown to reach her, she perceived it to be highly contaminated. Due to its position in her home, it was slowly spreading to most of her possessions and the rest of her flat, and as such, she was unable to walk past it. Long story short, she didn't eat for 17 days because she couldn't get out to the shop and was surviving on an emergency supply of bottled water, which she had rationed down to 350 millilitres a day because she could not touch her taps. She made several calls for help to the services involved in caring for her, but as usual the staff were on leave. Vexxie's illness has had her in hospital several times before and she hates it in there. In the end, her GP alerted the police, who came to her home and took her to hospital. In hospital, she was put on a drip for a couple of hours before being turned away by the mental health team. This happens all too often. She was devastated after having been forced to walk past the contaminated item to get to the hospital, only to be sent straight home again. She had nowhere else to turn and felt like giving up, so she urgently pleaded with me to travel to her despite the risk of contamination. She spent £150 on the next available train ticket, even though travel could have been bought for less than half of that had the price taken a route that goes through the contaminated area. Earlier I said that I was cold and cynical about mental illnesses like these, since upon first look, it looks like an easy way of getting everything you need in life for free. I'd hate to be fooled by a con man, or tricked into ruining my own life to help somebody else make theirs better. Thing is, in no way does OCD make Vexxie's life better. It makes each and every day a painful ordeal where you end up losing everything you fight so hard to get in the first place. And if she has willfully pretended to have this condition for the many years she's had it, then it makes her just as ill and in need of help regardless. Vexxsie doesn't want to live on handouts. She wants nothing more than to get the treatment she needs and to return to normality. But through supporting her, I have seen firsthand how appalling the state of the mental health system is. It seems impossible to access therapy and care from properly trained staff. If you're interested in knowing more about OCD, then feel free to ask her about it on her channel. She's more than happy to clear up any confusion about it and to try and explain how there's no easy answer. She's keen to explain how dangerous, stubborn and irrational an obsession can be. I may also do a follow-up video where I cover some of the more shocking and ridiculous situations that I've encountered in this past week of living with her and her limitations.